you for being here despite the heat and all the other events that are happening in Delhi. The next session is called River of Stories. We have with us Arijit Sen, who's a graphic artist, cartoonist, and designer based in New Delhi. He's a co-founder of People Tree, a collaborative studio and store for artists, designers, and craftspeople that has grown since its inception in 1990 into a widely regarded name associated with the promotion of artisanal innovation, creative community building, and social advocacy. Along with his wife and fellow designer Gurpreet Sidhu, he leads People Tree's in-house design studios in New Delhi and Goa. Arijit started collecting and drawing comics in his early teens and has been deeply involved with the development of comics and graphic novels in India. His pioneering work, River of Stories, which is what our session is named after, is considered to be India's first graphic novel. Arijit is also co-founder of POW Collective of graphic artists and a key figure behind the award-winning POW, the anthology of comics published by Penguin. His comics and graphic art have been widely published and exhibited internationally. Arijit has also conceptualized and led a team that executed one of the world's largest hand-painted murals installed at the Virasat-e-Khalsa Museum in Anandpur Sahib, Punjab. Arijit is Mario Miranda Chair, visiting professor at Goa University, where he has initiated an experimental arts research project entitled Mapping Mapsa Market Project, about which we will also hear, involving students, educationists, and artists. In 2015-16, he was engaged in an Indo-Palestinian project on cultural exchange and resistance in collaboration with theater artists from both countries. He's a fellow of the Salzburg Global Seminar. In conversation with Arijit is Amita Baviskar, who is a professor of sociology at the Institute of Economic Growth, Delhi. Her research focuses on the cultural politics of environment and development in rural and urban India. Her first book, In the Belly of the River, Tribal Conflicts over Development in the Narmada Valley, and other publications, explore the themes of resource rights, popular resistance, and discourses of environmentalism. She's currently studying food and agrarian environments in Western India. Her recent publications include the edited books Contested Grounds, Essays on Nature, Culture, and Power, Elite and Everyman, The Cultural Politics of the Indian Middle Classes, and First Garden of the Republic, Nature on the President's Estate. She has also received several awards for her contributions to development studies and social science research. What is a little less known about Amita is that she hand-lettered the first Indian graphic novel, which is sort of what brings them together on this panel. Over to you guys. Thank you.
Hello, pleasure to be here and sharing this space with Amita, with who, as Nishta just mentioned, we collaborated on the River Stories. Apart from the fact that Amita patiently hand-lettered the entire book when I was done with the artworks, I used Amita's research and translation of the creation myth of the Bilala people of the Narmada Valley, which was integrally woven into my book, into the story of that I told through the River of Stories. It's called River of Stories because in a way I kind of saw a structural way to tell the story of the protests against the dam building in the Narmada, on the Narmada River, connecting it to the way a river is fed by many streams. And I saw that how we tell stories obviously affects or explains our understanding of things. And I chose to interpolate the Bilala creation myth, which explains the origins of the Narmada River, with the kind of story of people today like us who see nature and rivers like the Narmada as a resource which can be exploited for our profit. So it's really two different worldviews looking at the same thing, the Narmada River, in a way, and the many other substreams that go around that. So I saw the book, my work as a kind of a river, which is why it's called River of Stories. So let me just take you quickly through some pages. We can't go through it in detail. And I'd like to bring you to something which I've done. And this is one of my earliest projects this was completed in 1994. And I'd like to show you something that I've done very recently. I mean, my most recent project, which I showed at Goa in December last year, was called Mapping Mansa Market. Okay, I'm going to, there are lots of slides. I'm going to kind of, we don't have the time to go through in detail. I just like you to get a sense of thing, because then we could talk about different aspects of it. And so it's more like a preview. As I said, I saw the book as a kind of, as a story itself, as a river, fed by many streams. And the first one, the spring from which the river rises, is the story of the Adivasi. The Narmada River itself arises from a place called Ambarkant, is a spring in eastern Madhya Pradesh. It's a obviously it's a sacred site, and it's also a site that is shared by different communities, including the caste Hindus and the Adivasis and other communities of the region. But I felt that the real spring is like the one I visited near, not far from Alirajpur, about a half a day's bus ride from Alirajpur, deep in the wooded hills, where there was a spring coming up. And obviously that was one of the many hundreds, maybe thousands of such springs that do eventually feed the river Narmada. And so I started with an image of that, and I called it the spring, meaning to say the first thread of the story. Sorry. And the first thread of the story is the creation myth that of the Vilala people, which Amita shared with me and helped me to understand. I mean, it was very interesting to talk to a variety of people working with the Narmada Andolan, people like myself who were attracted to it, were part of it, but were coming in from a very different world, and to sort of see and the book really shaped itself through the course of that movement, through the course of the talks and the marches we went on, and so on. So this is Malgu Gayan telling the story of the river Narmada. And then is the other story is of a displaced Adivasi woman called Jelku, who works in the protagonist. My protagonist is a young character called Vishnu, much like myself, I guess. A little bit wet around the ears. This is his first job, and as a reporter, and he goes to visit. And at home, he has a lady who comes to do the jharu puja, like in a typical middle class home, and she happens to be from this fictitious river valley called Reva, which is an old name for Narmada. I mean, I must point out that it's all based on, this entire book is based on the events of the Narmada Andolan and all that happened around it, but it's all fictionalized, or rather given a kind of a thin veneer of fiction. So this is another thread as Vishnu realizes that where he's going is where Relku spent her childhood, and starts talking to her for the first time, and begins to understand something about the background to the life that he's about to experience. the narrative of the Gayan of the Bilala people keeps interweaving with the story of Relku's childhood, of Vishnu's own story as he travels to the valley and he gets to understand the resistance that's building among people there. And at times, because it's a medium that uses a language and image, I deliberately juxtaposed the two so that the textual story was doing something else and the image was about something else. And I kind of use that device quite often in this storytelling, where the text and the image are actually saying complementary, sometimes even contradictory things. There are a lot of details here, which is interesting because I think, for example, over here on that vertical frame, the second frame, you see those coin weighing machines which tell you a fortune on ticket. I mean, these are things that have vanished since then, and in many ways, because I drew everything from my own experience, from my sketches as I traveled in the valley. Today, when I look back, I find some details that are very interesting because they're actually almost like sort of historical documents. Sorry, I'm going on. Yeah. This is a part of the Gayan which elaborates on not only the origins of the two rivers, Narmada and Tapti, but also the origins of the musical instruments that are used to sing the Gayan and other songs and stories of the Bilala people. What I'm really pleased about in the long run is that we were able to use government funds to create what is basically an anti-government book, and nobody nobody knew or cared even actually. Okay, so that's the last page. So that's first river stories. I mean, we can always go back to some of those frames if we need to when we're talking. Now, I'm just taking a jump to 2017, that is 23 years later. And this is work I showed, as I said, at the Serendipity Arts Festival. And it's part of a 3-year project that I've been doing with students of the Goa University. It's called Mapping Maps of Market. What I did, I mean, there were many outcomes of that project with the students. I had students mostly they're not art students. They were students from mostly liberal arts, I mean, philosophy, history, sociology. And I used to take them into the market and we used to kind of visually document the market because it's a very, very fascinating market. It's an old market in Goa. And what's interesting about the market is that normally when you say it's a historical market, it is a very historical market. people have this sense of being somehow old buildings and old architecture and so on and so forth. But master market has none of that because the Portuguese purpose-built in the late 1950s, they purpose-built a very functional concrete flat-roofed series of buildings to shift the market from where it originally was. And so there's nothing heritage or historical looking about the market, but actually what the people practice there and what their knowledge is and what is sold and bartered and exchanged and kind of for example, the forms of barter and exchange and commerce. That's where the history is. I mean, that's why it's a heritage market, because actually the knowledge in there is hundreds of years old. And so this notion that heritage or history lies in bricks and stones, master market kind of challenges that idea. And I found that very interesting about the market. So I devised a map of the market of a certain portion only, where I drew every vendor, every shop, every item being bought and sold in that market, and the stories behind them. And I laid it out like a huge map, which was arranged like the market itself, except that there were separate artworks on these horizontal platforms that you see, so that people could negotiate the space like a huge map laid out on the ground. So there were 13 of these artworks, which range in size from 20 feet to 8 feet. I spoke to Nishta about bringing it here because it's very interesting to negotiate it as a physical thing than to see it on screen. And also because it involves a game which participants can play, and which you can see people playing here. I mean, there are game cards, and you have to find the answers within the market. These are some of the artworks. The conversations are both for me, it's a bringing together of the forms that really engage me as an artist. Maps, comics, storytelling, and in a sense, a kind of a documentary recording. So these are actually more detailed than virtually every product has been documented. Thanks to my students, I had many students to do this groundwork for me. And the conversations reflect many things, not only about the market, but about Goa as a whole, about people involved with different things in Goa. Like, for example, in the previous slide, these two people in the corner, they resemble people who Goa is not a very large place, so some people are relatively well-known people. For example, this man in the green kurta there looks a bit like Claude Alvarez, who's been campaigning against mining, the mining mafia and all the stripping of the land by the iron mine owners. So the conversation between him and this young woman in pink is about that. So using the market as a kind of a space, which it actually is. I mean, that's where a market is, a place where people meet and talk about other stuff. So in a way, to me, the Mapsa market is like a microcosm of Goa as a whole. And because I documented everything so, in a sense, in so much detail, all the people and everybody could recognize themselves in each of these frames. People knew, oh, that's Mr. Lobo and that's Kevlik or whatever. I mean, all the individuals were documented, and their professions and their tools, their practices. That I also took the liberty to bring in very fictional characters, such as here's a conversation between Miss Fonseca, who is a iconic character created by Mario Miranda, and Superman. And Superman has developed, and there are these tailors who do job work in the market. So Superman was chasing some mining truck, and his cloak got caught in a electrical wire, so he's got come here to get it fixed. Father Bismarck Diaz is an environmental activist who was killed under mysterious circumstances last year. People have been asking for a judicial probe, although the official version is that he drowned while swimming. An extremely unlikely possibility because he was a very good swimmer. And so there are posters and often campaigns against, trying to protest the death of Father Bismarck. So I introduced these elements also within the market space, within the other conversations that people are having. Many of the artworks are multi-directional because you view them by walking around them. It's some images of people playing the game, looking at their question cards. So the idea of the game was also to engage people in a different way of looking, not just passively viewing, but actively looking, because you have to play the game, find answers to the questions you've selected, and win a reward at the end of it. And people got really excited about that, and there was a lot of that was happening. Amita, you might recognize that gentleman. I modeled him on Alito. This was the game, and you had to pick up cards at this game counter. You could select 5 out of 48 possible questions and then find the answers within the artworks. Just to give you a sense of some of the questions. These are the question cards. Okay, I think that's good enough. Thank you for watching.
Well, I want to talk about what's common to the MAPSA work as well as the Narmada work. And, what I'm always struck by in your work is how brilliantly realistic it is. In the sense that you look at it, when I was doing my research in the Narmada Valley and I stayed with an Adivasi family in a village, I used to sometimes draw and paint little things like a bakri or a murgi or something. And people there didn't have a tradition of drawing. So often they would look at, say, my hen picture and say, Zaat kukri dikhai tali, in this tone of wonder. It looks exactly like a hen. So whenever I look at your pictures, I think, Zaat, whatever, Claude Alvarez dikhai tala or something. So But of course, what you're doing is not just representing exactly, a hoo rendition, but you're also selecting and you're arranging and you're imagining juxtapositions as well as narratives. So I want to first hear how do you decide what's essential in terms of representing, say, the market or the story of the Narmada struggle? And what are the elements that you decide to leave out? And how do you make that choice?
Yeah. Well, okay, before I come to that, I'd just like to say what an image that triggered my idea to do the river stories, the entire comic book in the first place, which was I was in the village with some of the activists. We had gone to visit Baba Amte at his ashram, and we were walking back. It was late evening with a late evening light, and some village person from the distance on a bund rode by on a motorbike with throwing up this cloud of dust behind him. And beyond that, I could see the river glistening with that evening light. Suddenly I felt some kind of a moment of like wonderment at this sight. And that person just seemed to have a story. For me, I could project many things into that person who I'd never seen before, I would never see again. But in a way, my idea to do river stories was born from that image or from that moment. That person kind of provoked something. But he didn't even in the end figure in the book or anything. I mean, it was just some kind of a trigger thing. So on the one hand, why I'm saying this is that a little bit, it just comes, I think, from drawing that you tend to, that images kind of, that drawing an image encapsulates many layers of meaning when one draws it. The what is, as you said, realistic, what is real or obvious or visible is only one layer, and there are many kind of layers of meaning that get woven into that image. And I think, like when I was doing the mobster market work, for example, with my students, who are none of them from art backgrounds, I would prohibit them from using their phones, cameras, or recorders or whatever, and only walk in the market only with a sketchbook and pencil, even if they all obviously said we can't draw. So I said, doesn't matter. Drawing is not an end result; it's a process, and I want you to follow the process. I don't care whether you make a good drawing or bad drawing or whatever it is. And I think mostly that's what happens, in a kind of in our sort of in our education, which is so book and text oriented, that we understand drawing to be something that is only meant to intended to produce an end result of some kind, which is either good or bad. And but I really think that drawing is actually a way of observing. And when you draw, you essentialize things because you can't draw everything. If I'm making a portrait of you, I can't draw the stripes on your scarf. Maybe I don't need it. It's a natural process of taking out what is important, what's essential. Maybe your posture, maybe that look in your eyes. That's what I want to get because that's what I feel is important and essential in you at this moment or whatever I'm depicting. So in that sense, I think drawing is a way of observing, like a deep observation, the act of drawing, not what you produce. And that often determines, of course, your deep observation also being informed by your previous knowledge and understanding and all of that. But in a sense, that process of observation is the first way in which I kind of take what I want or what is important for me in that situation, and I leave out what's irrelevant. And then, of course, that's the first step of the process.
Well, in our instructions for this conversation, we were told we have to talk about how you as an artist deal with the problem of representing people very different from yourself in a way that doesn't create a further power imbalance and that others them and so forth. So I'm glad you mentioned ways of seeing, because in your extraordinary attention to detail, there is also the way in which you manage to capture some sort of an essence of a situation. But here there is a certain sort of a trap, because the problem with a lot of representations, especially of Adivasis, Dalits, and so on, has been that they have been essentialized. Especially in the context of a struggle like the one against the dam, in the case of the Narmada Bachao Andolan, for the longest time, the main representation of Adivasis was as ecologically noble savages. So these were people who lived in harmony with nature. They could not be removed from the Narmada Valley, which had been their home for generations, because they shared such a strong relationship with the land, with the river, and that if you broke away that relationship by displacing them, you would be killing them, destroying a culture. And that's an essentialist view of who Adivasis are, but it was yet a view which had been invested with a lot of political power, because that was primarily the view that the anti-dam movement found useful for making claims about Adivasis. So a more complex rendering of Adivasi life, was always looked upon critically by the Andolan activists, because they thought it would end up undermining their case. If you said, Adivasis are really hard up, sometimes they cut down trees in order to plant crops. That goes against the image of Adivasis always protecting forests. And so these were the sorts of, ground realities that often tended to get suppressed. So in terms of how you deal with the politics of representation in your own work, because you've also had to contend with questions about whose stories you tell, and how do you tell those stories in ways that respect their right to tell their stories as well. So can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think first of all, as there's well, as an artist, I think I look at the reality around me somewhat differently than, say, an academic would, and I think the whole point of a storyteller is to be able to use one's humanity or empathy to step into someone else's shoes. I mean, any story is about that. It's about somebody else. It's like the storyteller, or whether it's a man or a woman or whatever kind of a social context he comes from, he or she, stepping into their character's shoes and telling the story of those characters, whether it's a filmmaker or an artist or a graphic novelist or literature, author, whatever. So I think academics can never go into that space. Academics, the academic view has to maintain that divide. Divide in the sense, view from the outside. That liberty of saying that I am speaking in the language of my subject or my character is, I think that's a kind of one kind of separation that is very critical. At the same time, I think the question of how do you step into someone else's, whatever your character might be, into your character's shoes, and speak through their voices or their feelings about their struggles, needs to be necessarily done with the ability to, based on obviously being a part of that situation, as much as you as an outsider can become a part of a situation, from using that deep observation that I think is critical to the production of any kind of art, and being able to empathize and put yourself into a space where you can create a character, a viable, living, breathing, believable character, is, I think, the basic premise of creating narratives of the storyteller's art. And I really don't think that you can have a good story or you can have a bad story. And ultimately that's, I think these are the elements that constitute or on which we judge the quality of storytelling or a narrative. How successful is a storyteller, is how successfully or how empathetically the storyteller is able to step into the shoes of. But at the same time, that act of stepping into the other person's shoes, that is the basis of art, and I think that is always up for question, and that's something that at the same time I don't think there's an answer for.
Well, I actually think there are more similarities than you'd imagine, because I think, of course, there is, every academic has to be faithful to the facts. That goes without saying. But at the same time, we're also in the business of persuasion. Why do you read this particular book on this question and not another? Because this book persuades you better. And it persuades you not only on the basis of facts and arguments, but also by the manner in which it conveys a story. Why is it that we read a book? Why do we read Sainath's stories about poverty in rural India and feel, this guy really knows what he's talking about because of how he tells the story as much as the substance of them. But I think this idea of academic detachment is sort of overdone because especially it may be true for other social sciences like economics, which I actually don't think should be in social science at all. But anything else requires an act of interpretation, be it history, be it sociology, be it anthropology. And interpretation necessarily means that you recognize that there is a distance between your reality and what you're studying. And that distance needs to be bridged through what Max Weber, since we're in a German institution, I feel I should pay homage to him. Max Weber called it Verstehen, or empathy. You recognize that you can't inhabit the mind of another being, but what you can do is immerse yourself as much as possible in their world and represent them to the best of your ability, always recognizing that your representation is going to be partial and incomplete, and that the world will accommodate your interpretation and other people's, and that through that mosaic, perhaps we'll come to have a fuller picture. So I think that struggle for empathy is, if it's done ethically, then it can help us deal with this problem of writing about other people. I mean, for me, when I was writing, my Narmada book, which came out essentially I finished the research and writing in 1992. What was very different at that time was that there were very few Adivasis who were writing about their own lives. Dalit literature had taken off, and there was a huge flowering of people writing about their own experiences, the experiences of their families, communities. That wasn't true of Adivasis. Now, of course, there's a sea change. I mean, one thinks of the work of somebody like Hansta Shekhar. He's an Adivasi himself, and he's able to write about that world as somebody who belongs to it, but also somebody who stands a little bit outside of it. So I think constantly negotiating that inside-outside is critical to what we do, whether you do it much more imaginatively. I mean, you can draw Superman in there. I can't put in Superman into my work, or Miss Fonseca. I mean, I'd love to, but it's not, it won't pass muster. But I think given that different relationship to facts, in some ways what we are both trying to communicate, whether through scholarly writing or through your art, is something that we feel is true. And that trueness can transcend facts in your case, But in my case, I have to be tethered to them.
Yeah, I mean, last year I collaborated with Vidyun Sabani to edit a book of non-fiction comics. And I think even in the realm of storytelling, the kind of, there is always that fiction and non-fiction kind of a bridge or whatever, a space, which of course is getting transgressed all the time. And I think exactly what you're saying between academia and art is also in that, there is notionally a space, but it's also being transgressed from both sides. But I am really interested in this gray liminal area between what is fact and what is fiction. And I think I depend a lot, like your work inspired a lot of what I did with River Stories. Similarly with Mapsa Market, I've been talking to a lot of people. There isn't a lot of textual material about Mapsa. There are a couple of books, but there is a lot of information, knowledge. I mean, people who know a lot about the past and who are aware of many things. And so for me, that kind of research has to underpin what before my imagination can take off. I mean, that's like really critical. And I see that what you're saying is that from the academic purpose, you're actually transgressing those boundaries from the other side, in a sense. And yet there are some, I mean, I can never in my storytelling work claim that this is fact. I always put it forward as a story. Even though River Story is about real thing, it's still a story. While you cannot ever let go of that fact claim, then you will no longer be a social scientist.
True, but since the 1990s, there's been this cultural turn in, say, anthropology, where there is a recognition about the what's the word, about the fact that we think we're being scientific and objective, but actually we're in a fairly slippery relationship with facts. Because I go to a particular village, I write about it, I think it's an authoritative account. You could go to the same village and find something completely different altogether. It's to do with who we are. And our own social location, our gender, our class, our ability to, speak languages, a number of things shape our encounter or our experience of a particular thing. So we're likely to, but given that each account is therefore going to be idiosyncratic, how do we make sure, how do we say this account rings truer than this one? And so even though, so there is art involved there as well, just as you do all of this research that underpins your approach to art, because I don't think all artists necessarily do the same kinds of research. Well, we've just had a card flashed at us to tell us that we have to wind up because we have some time for questions and answers or comments. So if you'd like to join the conversation, please go ahead.
Artistic work, but without being disrespectful, I think you dodged the complex rendering part. So, has there been a moment where, for example, you had a character in the Narmada case, which was an Adivasi, but there were some contradictions in some of their practices and their ways of life, but you chose to be essentialist in your depiction, and how did you did you come across any such situation?
Yes. I think we're talking about the River Story, which I worked in the early 90s. So I was in my late 20s then, early 30s when I completed it. My own understanding of those kind of situations has changed, and surely I was experiencing this different world in a deeper way for the first time in my life. I myself would think that there is a certain amount of the essentializing that we're talking about did happen in my narration. Also, my view was shaped a lot by the Narmada Andolan, who, not in so many words, but because I wanted to do a book which would bring their kind of message to urban audiences. I remember this is before the day of internet and all of that. So urban audiences actually knew nothing about what the hell is going on there. Most young people in the colleges and other places didn't know and didn't care about it. It was like a different planet. And so I saw my work as being a very important kind of bridge, bringing the stories from the valley to making them intelligible to readers in the cities. And so certainly, I mean, some of that storytelling is also, like I'm saying, consciously or not so consciously, picking up from the Andolan itself that we need to tell this kind of a story. And but at the same time, I also had, I mean, Amita's work is about that. I mean, at that point, she was actually researching and writing this book where she's questioning this kind of essentialist view of the Adivasi. And so it is informed by many things, but certainly the essentialist thread is also part of that, my work, yeah.
If I could just add to that, I think the length of this particular work, The River of Stories, meant that you had to sort of distill things. So there wasn't that much narrative space for, more complex representations, because it would then be a digression from the larger message, which was about the movement and how Adivasis were a part of it.
Thank you. About time, like it's when you capture a frame, it is at a particular point that you're capturing, I'm assuming, and then you're continuing to live in that space. Like for instance, if this project is spreading across 3 years, you pass that space again, and that space can get converted into an entirely different space. Like the ethos of it can completely change. It can become violent. Some space which you had captured at this moment as a very kind of light-hearted space can maybe in a matter of time turn into a completely violent space. So I have one part of the question is, have you encountered something like this actually in Goa? And the second thing is, in that case, like this also connected to this question that the distilling process. So when there is a movement or a political movement, as a part of which you are working on something, if it's fictional, so your work, art is kind of really political. So there is a political orientation to it, and it's a political message and a political direction that it has. But politics can also completely change, So have you ever encountered a place where, your political position with regards to a particular frame had to change, or, you had difficulty in negotiating?
I would say that individual, let's say, frames or depictions within a larger work are not standalone by themselves. They are dependent on what comes around it, after it, and before it, and so on and so forth. And so for me, even what I'm showing, somebody asked me that, in fact, Amit asked me, are you done with the MAPSA work? And I said, yeah, for now. For me, my work about a certain place or a situation or people keeps growing. I keep adding to it. I never consider something done and complete and finished. It's just what I'm showing you now is a particular iteration of that process. And so nothing is ever actually finished and complete. So everything has a possibility of changing, of just like in reality. And in my work, like I'm saying, let's say I draw this character who looks like Claude having this conversation about, actually about transportation of coal in Goa, which is something that's, or like that Father Bismarck episode. It's a specific moment in time, a year ago, that Father Bismarck was killed. My drawings, some of the drawings are based on things I've done before that. But it comes in. So it's also, my work is constantly in that sense, changing, updating, being modified by something. And so in that sense, it doesn't represent a static moment in time in any case.
I think we have time for one last question.
Hi, good evening. My name is Alicia. So this is regarding when you ask somebody this story, and especially about a place which is far away, say people who are Adivasis of the Narmada Valley, they would not know, their world is very different from ours when they tell their story. So their normal, like when we would ask them a question like, how do you think this is? Our lenses would be of like, how do you think the water conservation system is here? Our lens for water conservation would be very different from theirs. They say this is how it has been forever. And this is how, so how do you, have you ever had this problem of telling their story, which is very different? Like they don't know that they're very different from us. And when they tell their story versus us perceiving the story and then translating it to us as an audience, which is far away, we have never seen that. Like the information lost in this process, how do you try and bridge it?
I think, as I was saying, as an artist, it is, I'm entering into another world, another space, another people or community, and trying to look at it from within, empathetically, and with a certain kind of a openness to understanding things in a different way. And then when that becomes part of my process of storytelling to back in the other world from which I come from, I as an artist, I'm not making, as I said, I'm telling a story. I'm not making a truth claim. I'm not saying I'm telling you the Adivasi's perception of reality or his truth. I'm telling you what I understand and how I see it and what I experience and how I engage with that. So it is a coming together of worlds that has to be achieved in order to tell a story. I mean, there is not a claim that I'm telling you. Finally, only Khemla can tell his story. I can't tell Khemla's story, but I can narrate a story about my encounters with him and what I learned and understood from that view.
I think that what's really important when trying to represent something is to not be in a hurry to take people's stories and fit them onto some pre-existing template that one has in one's head. So, for instance, when I was living in this Bhilali, in this village in the Narmada Valley, it would have been very easy for me to interpret what people were doing in terms of, oh, look, now they're resisting the state. Oh, look, now they are fighting to save their forest. Because that's what I had gone there to find. I'd gone there to study their political struggles, and this is what leapt out at me. But the process of being open-minded meant that I was witness to a lot of other things which didn't fit that politics of resistance. Now, I found that the politics that really got people all juiced up and excited was when women ran off, left their husbands and ran off with somebody else. Because then all the men would get together and they would, smoke innumerable bidis and they'd talk about, they have to give us so much money in return for this insult to our honor and so on. And that politics to them was absolutely central to who they were as people who had honor and who had dignity. Now, I can't fit that into a politics of resistance. And in fact, a lot of activists in the area who wanted people to, always be fighting the good fight, we used to say, they keep wasting their time on these silly feuds. They should give them up. But for me to understand Adivasi ideas of politics meant trying to understand their values, what mattered. And if those values were patriarchal and about, quote unquote, women who run away and, who therefore have to be compensated for, it didn't suit my gender politics. But because it was theirs, I had to respect it for what it was. So I think, the short answer to your question is that one goes in with certain concerns, which in a way make us which mean that we're tuned to picking up certain things and not others. But if you're open enough to new experiences, then I think we will find our prior understandings challenged, and challenged in ways which are stimulating as well as good. And I think one has to be honest. One has to be open to things which don't fit in, things which seem to be at odds with what we want people to be or what we expect to find. I think it's that the openness of that journey and the unexpectedness of what might happen that probably makes both what you do and what I do always exciting and worthwhile.
And at that level also, interestingly, there is always a universal thing about people, like the example you gave. I mean, the anger that, say, a group of men might feel at a woman running away doesn't make them that different from a group of men in Delhi who will feel the same way if a woman in the community runs away. So there is also at another level, if you're, I think, as an artist, I bear that sense that we can understand each other's stories and we have a kind of common, let's say, humanity of emotions and relationships and needs and other things, which bind us regardless of however different worlds we come from. And I think that's the basis of storytelling. I mean, I can go to see a Russian movie and watch Anna Karenina living in the 19th century and feel for her, although we have nothing to do with each other. But that's because there's something that connects us as human beings. And so when we say that we must not enter into Adivasi space or tell that story, or if we go, what I'm saying is that there's also an othering that might happen through that process of putting down kind of should do's and should not do's. And so I think we have to also recognize that there is a kind of universalness of human experience that as an artist, it's really important to be able to hold on to. And that's where I suppose empathy and storytelling and all of those kind of motivations spring from.
Thanks. It was great to talk to you about River of Stories after so many years. Thank you.